Hi everyone, we are going to look at the IXL assignment CC16 Identifying Trends in Scatter Plots. This was something we kind of talked about when we were talking about creating scatter plots, but now we're going to go a little bit more detail as far as identifying those different trends. So here is a good description of the trends that you're going to see with scatter plots. So for starters, a positive trend is going to be a scatter plot that shows a positive trend when Y tends to increase as X increases. So for instance, if you look at this, we look at the X axis, the horizontal axis, and we see that, okay, as this is increasing, we can also see that the points are increasing on the Y axis. So for instance, looking at this point, we'll just pick out, a point here. We'll say this is probably a little over 1 on the X and about 2 on the Y. Okay, but then you go over here and this point is about, we would say 5.5, and it's to 6 on the Y. So you can see that from these 2 points, we have increased with both looking at the x-axis and the y-axis. So anytime you're looking at a positive trend, you're going to see that it's going to slowly, gradually increase the further, the more x increases, the more y increases. Okay. Now let's look at what happens when there's no trend. There's no association between the data. So a scatter plot shows no trend if there is no obvious pattern. So we can see here we have a point right here, and then we kind of increase on the x-axis, but we're also decreasing on the y-axis. But then if you look over here, this is, we're increasing on the x, but we're also increasing on the y. So it's like the points are just all over the place, and you can see that there's really no common description of this graph besides that there's no trend in the data. And then we go over to the negative trend, okay? A scatter plot shows a negative trend if Y tends to decrease as X increases. So when we look at the X-axis, we can see that, okay, it is increasing on the X-axis. However, when you look at the data at the Y axis, we can see that the data started at a high point here and then has slowly decreased to about right here. Even though X is still increasing, we can see that Y is decreasing, which means that this is going to show us that there is a negative trend in the data. One is increasing, one is decreasing. Okay, let's look at some examples of this. Okay, and this is just going to be kind of looking at the data and deciding, do I see a positive trend or do I see a negative trend, or is there really no, there's no association, no trend, nothing that I can say between the data. So in this graph, we want to know, does this scatter plot show a positive trend, a negative trend, or no trend? So I want you to go ahead and just take a look at this and, just think, is it showing me that the data is increasing both in the X and the Y? Is it showing me that the X is increasing, but the Y is decreasing? Or is it not really showing me any association between X and Y? Okay. We could actually say that this is going to be a positive trend. This data is going to show a positive trend. And as we get into more learning about those trend lines and those best fit lines, we can see that when we have our best fit line, it would probably be about right there. And we could say that from that point, we could see that the X is increasing and the Y is increasing. So this is going to show us that we have a positive trend in this data. Okay, let's take a look at another one of this. Now this one looks a little bit, and let me clear this. This one looks a little bit almost like a straight line. Okay, does this scatter plot show a positive trend, a negative trend, or is there no trend of the data? Well, looking at X, we can see that, okay, X is increasing. Even if it's just slightly, we would say that it's probably going from about 30 to about, we'd say about 70. We can see that the data is increasing. But then what about the y-axis? What about the y-axis? It does look like there's a trend with this data. the points are not all over the place. There's not a point up in the top corner, one in the bottom. It doesn't look like there is no trend. So we could either say this is positive or negative. When we look at that best fit line or that trend line, we could probably say that it's going to be right about here. Now, looking at that trend line, we can see that, okay, so as we move more to the right, we can see that the X is increasing. However, in this case, looking at the Y, it almost looks like the points start at the top and they're decreasing as we move to, to the bottom. So X is increasing, but Y is decreasing, which, going back to what we talked about with those trends, we would say that if X is increasing and Y is decreasing, we would say that we actually have a negative trend in this data, even if it's just slightly in this case. The data was kind of all squished together, but we can see that there is a negative trend once we look at that best fit line, which we will get into more of those best fit lines later. And then let's look at one more. So looking at this data, we have, points kind of, it seems like all over the place. We have a point right here. We have a point up here in the top. We've got points in the middle. There's just a lot of points on this graph, okay? Looking at the x-axis, we can see that, okay, increasing in value, there's really no association. X is not increasing as we increase on the x-axis. And then looking at the y-axis, we could say that, y is also doesn't appear to be increasing or decreasing in value. So we would actually look at this and we would say, okay, the points are kind of all over the place. There's really no association between X and Y. There's really no trend. There's really no way to draw that trend line that we have drawn before. So we would say that looking at this data, there really is no trend of this data.